Hello and welcome back to another video for WJEC Eduqas A-Level Related Studies Philosophy Theme 1. Today we're going to look at teleological arguments. The first teleological argument for God's existence is Aquinas' fifth way, which we're going to look at now. Aquinas gives his version of the teleological argument in the fifth of his famous 5 ways for the existence of God in the Summa Theologiae. He states that something which lacks intelligence cannot move towards fulfilling its end or purpose without something with intelligence moving it towards this end. His reasoning is largely based on Aristotelian physics, which holds that everything has a telos, which means purpose or end, to which it should be geared towards. For example, the telos of a pen is to write, and the telos of a knife is to cut. Aquinas says that inanimate things cannot achieve their telos without an intelligence directing them to their ends. So in other words, things which do not have a soul or do not think, so like rocks, for example, and leaves, they can't be moved, nothing can happen to them without something which is intelligent actually moving it. So a rock will not move unless, for example, a raccoon comes across and moves it, and the raccoon has intelligence. Okay? And so things don't just move without there being an intelligence directing something to its telos. That makes sense. The example that he gives, though, is of an archer and an arrow. So he points out that the arrow cannot reach the target by itself, right? The arrow is an inanimate object. It lacks intelligence. The archer, who is an intelligent being, needs to shoot the arrow in order for the arrow to fulfill its purpose. So there's an intelligence needed for non-intelligent things to fulfill their purpose, is effectively what he's saying. Similarly, the fact that natural bodies like stars and particles obey natural laws in order to fulfill their telos implies that there is a governing intelligence behind them that is directing them to complete their purpose. They can't fulfill their purpose or their end or their telos by themselves since they can't think. They are not intelligent beings, and so they need an intelligence to help them to do it. Okay? So things which are in the universe which are not intelligent, things like stars and particles, right? Natural bodies. Well, they're not intelligent, but they obey natural laws and they fulfill their purpose. And since his reasoning is that if an inanimate or a non-intelligent being is fulfilling its purpose, it follows that actually what's happening is there is an intelligence moving it. So if there are natural things moving, right? If there are natural things fulfilling their purpose, what does it mean? It means that there is an intelligence which is allowing them to fulfill their purpose. Something which is moving the stars in orbit, right? Because stars are inanimate, they are unintelligent, and they don't naturally fulfill their purpose. Something needs to direct that purpose, if that makes sense. So the governing intelligence, which directs all things to their ends, is God. Okay, so effectively what he's saying is that everything in the universe, everything that exists, has a purpose, has a telos, has an end, right? Whatever of those 3 words you want to use. And for those non-intelligent things, we need an intelligence to guide it. And the governing intelligence of the things of the whole universe, so like natural bodies and inanimate things, that has to be God. Who else could it be? It's effectively his reasoning, because God is like this ultra intelligence who sets in motion everything else and who directs everything that he's created to its end. Hence, the order and regularity that we observe in the natural world is proof of a designer who orders all things. This is what we call a design qua regularity argument. Okay, and we'll look at specifically what that means a bit later on when we look at the other teleological arguments. Okay, but what we see in the universe is we see things, for example, stars going in orbit or planets going in orbit, right? And we see the regularity of nature, how nature, natural laws, things like gravity and features of the universe remain the same. They remain regular. Okay, and since these things are not intelligent, since these things lack intelligence, they are inanimate. Well, what's causing them to fulfill their purpose, right? There has to be an intelligence behind that, an intelligent designer, and for Aquinas, that is God. All right, so that's the first teleological argument. The second teleological argument is known as Paley's watchmaker argument for the existence of God. So William Paley is largely credited with the modern formulation of the design argument in his work Natural Theology, in which he put forward the famous watchmaker argument. He asks us to imagine that when walking on a heath, we stumble across a stone, and inquire about how it came to be. By reflection, we would soon conclude that some natural processes form a stone and cause it to be on the heath. No issues. However, if we then came across a watch lying on the floor, we would not come to the same conclusion. We wouldn't say that the watch just came about by a natural process. We want something more than that. We want a better explanation. The watch is intricately arranged with cogs, springs and gears, interacting in just the right way so that the watch tells the time it fulfills its purpose. As a result, we deduce from this the complexity and purpose of the watch's mechanisms, that it was designed and created by someone with intelligence. So we might see a rock and just think, okay, well, it doesn't really matter how that came about, it just came about by natural processes. But when we see a watch, we're going to likely infer that it was created by an intelligent being, by a human being, because it is so intricately designed, because it is complex, and because it has a purpose that it is fulfilling, right? It's not like a stone. So thus, unlike the stone, the watch didn't just come about as a result of chance, and it's clearly designed by an intelligent watchmaker. Now, from this sensible observation that most, or everyone really should agree on, Paley extrapolates his argument to the whole universe, arguing that just as the watch needs a watchmaker, the universe needs a universe maker. Okay? The universe, in fact, is infinitely more complex than a watch. So if we are to expect the watch to be designed, we would also have to say the universe is designed as well, right? If the argument is, okay, the watch is so complex, therefore it has to be designed. Well, by the same logic, the universe is so much more complex, so therefore the universe must be designed, right, by an even more intelligent being. This is effectively an argument by analogy, stating that to be consistent, we must take both the watch and the universe as being designed. So effectively, Paley's saying, if you maintain that the watch has a designer, you have to maintain the universe the universe has a designer too, right? If you don't, you're not being consistent. For Paley, the designer of the universe is God, who is a creative intelligence, right? So he creates, and he is intelligent, meaning he has a mind, okay, not a brain, but a mind in terms of he is able to sort of think and act, right? Is not an inanimate object. So this first argument that he gives is a design qua purpose argument, because we can see that things have purposes, and therefore, if they have a purpose, like the watch, for example, they have to be designed by someone for a certain purpose. And the universe has a purpose, or things within the universe have a purpose, and therefore the universe has to have a designer, has to have an intelligent designer behind it. Another example that Paley gives is that of the human eye, which is so insanely complex with all its cells arranged perfectly to generate sight that it clearly points to an intelligent being who purposefully designed it this way. Okay, if you look at like an in-depth image of the eye, it's really intricate, and it's got all of these little sections, and it's very, very complex, right, for a small little thing like the eye. And so he's saying, well, if we're going to say the watch, which is already quite complex, has to be designed, then the eye really must be designed by someone really intelligent. Another example is Newton's laws of motions, right? Which are applicable to every fundamental particle. How is it that out of the gazillions of particles, I don't even know how many particles there are in the whole universe, that each one of them obeys the laws of physics? Each one of them obeys the gravitational constant and all the other laws and constants and sort of scientific variables, right? How come it's the case that every single one of them does that? Wouldn't a good explanation for this be that there is an intelligence behind it which has ordered them to be that way? So these two examples are design qua regularity arguments, since they seek to explain why things are regular and ordered. So why everything obeys Newton's laws of motions, why they're regular, and also why. And so we'd say that these are design qua regularity arguments. This argument uses scientific examples and attempts to explain why there is order and complexity in nature, meaning that it's appealing to many scientists. So this is one strength that you could argue there is for the teleological argument, specifically Paley's argument, because it's using scientific examples. Okay, it's appealing to science and empirical evidence, and it's of course a posteriori, right? And therefore it's going to appeal and be attractive towards a lot of people who are more empirically minded and scientific. Okay, this argument is using scientific data. What more could they ask for? For Paley, the best explanation behind the complexity, order, and regularity of nature, those three key components, right, is an intelligent designer, whom we call God. So basically what they're trying to do, both Aquinas and Paley, is say, when we look out in the universe and we see how complex different things are, the eye, the human body, stars, planets, the laws of motion, when we see how everything is ordered in a certain way and how it's regular and it's not just, it remains the same, right? How do we explain these things? And both Aquinas and Paley and theists in general agree that the best explanation for this is that there is a designer behind it, someone who is intelligent, right, has a mind, and has created this for a certain purpose and has ordered it in an intelligent manner, right? And that is God. Now, the third lot of the teleological arguments are known as the anthropic and aesthetic arguments by Tennant. So Frederick Tennant developed two main teleological arguments in his work Philosophical Theology. The first one is known as the anthropic principle. Tennant basically observes that the natural world in which we live contains exactly the things necessary for the sustenance of life, and the right conditions for life to arise. In this respect, he uses the theory of evolution by natural selection to support the existence of an intelligent designer, since this process can only be guided by such a being, right? This is quite a controversial claim, because often people believe that evolution, if it's true, stands as evidence against the existence of God, right? It's often quipped that evolution actually disproves God for some reason. Okay, but basically Tennant's saying, no, I grant that evolution is true, but for evolution to even take place, for how complex and specific and sort of progressing evolution is, we need an intelligent designer behind that. And so actually evolution cannot exist without God, is what he's saying. He also supposes that the fact that we can observe and rationally analyse the universe points to a creator who purposefully ordered it for our investigation. More recently, the discovery of certain physical constants, such as the gravitational constant, imply that someone set them to be as they are with intention, since they are all balanced on a razor edge, right, finely tuned to a certain degree, 9.8 meters per second squared is what the gravitational constant is, right? And how they're all very finely balanced just to the right sort of like Goldilocks degree, such that life can exist on Earth, right? And that planets exist, etc., right? So that means that if even just one of these constants, for example, was slightly different, no life in order would ever exist. So it's quite improbable that this would all just happen by chance. That's what he's arguing. More recently, Michael Behe has advocated for intelligent design from the concept of irreducible complexity, arguing that life would not have arisen without a creator who set the right conditions for its development. So again, he's talking about the complexity here of living organisms and saying that, we basically need an intelligent creator to set the initial conditions for evolution, to set the initial conditions for life on Earth, for organisms to actually exist, because without that, there's no chance we're going to get to this by chance. All right. And the second argument Tennant gives is the aesthetic argument. Aesthetics is the field of philosophy concerned with beauty, and Tennant asks why human beings, unlike other species, have such a great appreciation for beautiful things like the awe of nature, art, music, and cosmetics. Especially given the concept of survival of the fittest, it would appear that beauty serves no evolutionary purpose. So why are we so obsessed with it? Tennant answers this by asserting that our appreciation of beauty is a direct result of a loving God. This is because God, being omnibenevolent, ordered the world precisely for the development of life, but also for the enjoyment of his creatures. God equally wants us to love the world and adore living in it, rather than solely surviving in it. Thus, beauty is not necessary for a survival, but is rather a gift that implies God's existence and benevolence. So this is quite different to the other arguments, because it's looking at the idea of beauty and saying that beauty serves no evolutionary purpose, but we appreciate it so much. And that points to, according to Tennant, the idea that God loves us and he wants us to enjoy the world that we are in. Now let's have a look at the criticisms of the teleological argument, and that will sort of cover the four main arguments that we've looked at today. First of all, the idea that the analogies are weak and that there's a lack of empirical evidence. David Hume criticises the use of analogies in proving the design of the universe in his dialogues concerning natural religion. He states that just because we can say that a house had a builder does not mean we can infer that the universe had a builder or designer. The former we've experienced, we've seen, or at least we know that houses have builders. but the latter can never be experienced, right? We can never experience the universe having a builder or a designer. And since Hume is an empiricist, meaning he believes that knowledge comes through the senses, he didn't accept empirically unverifiable theories, okay? So even though, the teleological arguments are using empirical evidence, the idea that the universe was created by God or an intelligent designer is not something that we can empirically verify. And so as an empiricist, Hume is going to reject this idea. Furthermore, the house and the universe are just so different that no point of comparison can be drawn between them, despite their general resemblances, right? So, sure, a house is complex and a universe is complex, and it was in the house needs a designer, but the universe, according to Hume, is just so different to a house that we can't really make that comparison at all. Hume concludes that since the universe is unique, no analogy could ever suffice to explain its origins, right? We just can't make an analogy. So we can't use the Paley's watchmaker analogy because the universe is just in a different category, right? We just don't know. It's effectively what he's saying. Although this criticism preceded Paley, it can still be charged against his watchmaker analogy, though, okay? Moreover, while analogies are based on human experience, how can we make one with the creation of a universe, something that we have not experienced, right? So this, again, is reliant on his empirical epistemology. If you're evaluating this and thinking, okay, maybe this isn't a great argument, you could say that, well, do we actually need to be able to empirically verify the beginning of the universe? Or could we make, like Paley and the others are doing, an educated guess? Or an informed decision based on the evidence, right? It seems that the universe is so complex, so ordered, so finely tuned, that it would make sense to say that there is something behind it. There is an intelligence behind it, right? So, sure, Hume's setting a standard where we need to have like empirical evidence for it. Well, we're not going to have empirical evidence, right? That's impossible because none of us were there. But that doesn't mean that we still can't theorize and think about what actually caused the universe to exist, right? And it would seem that for some, this objection that Hume is giving isn't strong enough because the idea of God, the idea of an intelligent designer, is better than the alternative. There was nothing, right? So you've just got to be aware that we need to challenge these challenges too, okay? And just because they're a challenge or a criticism doesn't mean that they are sort of infallible, right? You're able to evaluate the challenges and the strengths and see what you think as well. And that's useful very much for a 30-mark question. Hume also supposed that the universe bore greater resemblance to natural things like carrots than to artificial constructions, as the latter, so artificial things, as the former, I should say, grow and develop, right? So carrots and natural things grow and develop, as the universe does, but artificial constructions like watches and houses don't. And so actually, if we're going to make a comparison, it's better to compare the universe to natural things because the universe is a natural thing. And natural things are inanimate, right? But then Aquinas is going to say, okay, that's the exact point, right? The exact point is that because the universe is a natural thing, it's not intelligent, it's inanimate, therefore it needs an intelligence governing it, an intelligence behind it. So again, there's another weakness that we could say for this point by Hume. Now the second criticism is the idea of apparent design. So David Hume again attacked the persuasiveness of the teleological argument in his dialogue concerning natural religion by claiming that it's a fallacy to say that the universe is designed just because it seems so. So remember, a fallacy is sort of flawed logic. It's an illegal move, so to speak, in philosophy, right? By claiming that it's a fallacy to say that the universe is designed just because it seems so, right? So to support this point, he distinguishes between authentic and apparent design. Hume thinks that what we perceive to be design, order and purpose in nature, might appear to be designed, so that's apparent design, but it is no more than that. And it's not authentic design, but just apparent design. So just because it may look like, when we see things obeying the laws of physics, and we see how nature is very ordered and complex, it just appears to us as human beings that is complex. But how do we know that that is actually complex? That's just how it appears to us. So we've got to distinguish between what appears to us and what something actually is. Apparent design and authentic design. Okay? In the dialogues, Philo refers to the Epicurean hypothesis, which is the idea that order and design will eventually arise randomly out of chaos and disarray. This theory could explain why we observe design in the universe, as it's just by random chance. Okay? So Hume's basically saying there is no design, right? It's just what appears to us. But basically, because we have things, particles are moving around, eventually, if you just leave enough time, this is the Epicurean hypothesis, eventually there will be what resembles design, right? Just imagine if you just see particles moving around for billions and billions of years, well, eventually they're going to all clump together and create what we have now, okay? And that's not design, that's just random chance. The third challenge is known as faulty design. So Hume takes a final stab at the teleological argument by asking how we know that assuming someone did design the universe, he designed it well. It could be the case that the designer is lacking in skill, and the universe isn't as well ordered as we thought, or it could be better designed. He uses the example of seeing a shipbuilder with his ship for the first time, in which he might consider him a genius for creating the ship. However, if we are to look further, we would see that this was just an imitation of other ships, and is actually worse than them. Also, the shipbuilder may have had many failed attempts at making a ship before, and this last one was the best one he has done yet. Right, so the shipbuilder is analogous to God in this example. Therefore, in comparison to the universe, it may be that the designer of this universe is a poor designer, and there are other universes which are designed much better than his. Right? So, even though it appears that they're designed, there could be other universes which are better designed. Now, is that actually, let's think about it, is that really an argument against the teleological argument? Okay, let's assume for a minute that Hume is right. Maybe that's the case. Maybe there are many universes, and maybe we live in a universe that isn't well designed. Well, actually, isn't that affirming the teleological argument? Isn't that saying that actually we are? You know, it's not really going against the possibility. It's just saying that actually we might be in a badly designed universe. But so what? Maybe that is the case. Maybe God designed a bad universe, right? So that doesn't really, you know, if you think deeply about it, that doesn't really count anything against the teleological argument at all, really. Moreover, it could be that he has made a lot of other universes that are faulty, and even this one has its faults, such as natural disasters and death. Okay, again, is that really a strong argument? Well, we still have the universe, and even though it has faults, it's still created by God. So he's not really attacking the idea, the premise, the central premise of the teleological argument is that God created the universe, right? He's the intelligence behind it. And this third criticism, I think, doesn't really respond to that very well, like the other two do. Now, the fourth criticism of the teleological argument is that it is not necessarily the God of classical theism. Okay, so even before we get into this, let's think, is this going to be a very strong argument? Okay, maybe it's not necessarily the God of classical theism. Maybe it's another God. But doesn't that still mean the teleological argument works, right? Maybe not if you believe in the God of classical theism, it doesn't work for you. But let's say you don't believe in that God, you believe in another God, right? So what if it's not necessarily the God of classical theism? The teleological argument still stands. So we can already sort of think, okay, this isn't a very strong criticism, right? But let's see what he has to say. If it is granted that the universe is designed, it does not follow this designer is the God of classical theism. That's true, right? Just because the universe may be designed doesn't mean that we necessarily have to arrive at, for example, the Trinity or Allah or, you know, Yahweh, for example. You don't have to arrive at that God. In fact, in Philo in Hume's dialogues assumes that it makes more sense to say the universe had multiple designers, like ships and houses, since it's vastly more complex. Surely, if the analogy were to follow, the design of the universe would have to be complex and multiple too, and therefore... Now, there is a response by Swinburne to this criticism, and he uses Occam's razor to respond, claiming that it is a simple hypothesis to assert one designer than many. But even if this argument is correct, that there is more since there are multiple and complex designers that themselves are designed, then so be it. It may be that there are many gods, maybe that polytheism is true. Right? But this doesn't count against the teleological argument, it just counts perhaps against a specific version of the teleological argument, that which advocates for the God of classical theism. In addition, it could be argued that the designer of our universe decided to create the universe and then moved on, leaving us alone to our own devices. This is similar to deism. Or maybe he later died and is not eternal. Right? Again, this is just going against the God of classical theism, but it may be that there is another God, right, like this category is describing. But again, this does still count against atheism, the idea that there is no designer, no God at all. Either way, the teleological argument doesn't go far enough in proving that the God of classical theism designed the universe, right? So you could say that maybe it doesn't prove the God of classical theism, but it proves another God, or it proves no God at all. Okay, that's another challenge we could say. And the final challenge to the teleological argument is the theory of evolution. In his landmark 19th century work, Origin of Species, Charles Darwin put forward his theory of evolution by natural selection, which has now been widely accepted as the best explanation for the development of life on Earth. Darwin claimed that all life on Earth has evolved and become more complex by the principle of natural selection, which is blind and random. This theory purports to explain the supposed complexity and design of living organisms, who have gradually increased in complexity over time to adapt to their environment. Okay, so the complexity is not sort of instantaneous thing that is designed, but it's actually a very, very slow, long process that things have become from very simple to very complex. And that's how we can explain it, rather than by design. It can also respond to Tennant's anthropic principle in that we have simply adapted to our surroundings rather than the world being purposely designed for us to live in and appreciate. Okay, so there's an alternative explanation for why we see, for example, living organisms being so complex. And so then you could weigh up, what's a better explanation? Is it that it's sort of a random evolution? Did evolution, or can evolution explain it all? Or does evolution itself actually need God to direct it? That's what Tennant argues, right? And perhaps what about the universe itself? This theory of evolution only talks about life, but what about the wider universe and natural bodies like stars and particles? Doesn't explain those. So do be ready and don't be afraid as well to sort of critique the criticisms, okay? And just come to your own judgment and conclusion over this argument and the rest as well. But that's all for the teleological arguments. Thank you.